Once upon a time,
in a land far away.
I'm Katrina.
And I'm Geoff.
This is the Fairy Tellers Podcast.
Myth, legend, folklore, fable.
We explore what they say about cultures then and now,
Grab a hot cup of cocoa and a comfy seat
while we tell you a tale.
Welcome back to the podcast. So excited to be back talking to you, Katrina, and to all of you at home or in your car or at the gym or the various other places that you may be listening to a podcast.
And hopefully, again, we're, setting up that rhythm of putting out podcasts fairly regularly. And I was just going to say, I can't wait to start posting some pictures of how much I've marked up this current book that I'm reading.
Ooh.
It is Spectres of the Marvelous: Race and the Development of the European Fairy Tale by Kimberly J. Lau. It just came out in December of 2024. And I'm super excited to turn it into like a bunch of different episodes because she is looking at these like different storytellers, all of which that, we've talked about, going like chapter by chapter through story collectors that I think all of us would recognize, such as Jean-Baptiste Bissile, the Grimm's Brothers, and the Andrew Lang Colored Fairy Books collections. And she is talking about several stories, some of which we've covered on the podcast and some that we have not. So I'm excited to use this book as a resource for future episodes, especially because when it comes to looking at fairy tales through kind of like specific lenses, like through the lens of like race and what stories say about cultures' views on race, or even like we've talked about disability in the past. Like when it comes to those type of things, there aren't a whole lot of resources. And so I'm excited that like this resource is like brand new and out and packed full of just like really, really good information and references back to stories. And it actually reminded me that one of the things that was the driving force behind creating this podcast was reading books like this and wanting to tell the story, because sometimes they'll mention stories, but they're stories that I hadn't read before or whatever. And so I'd have to pause while I was reading a book, go read that tale, and then get back to the book. And it's been really cool while I've been like reading this book, because they'll mention the story, like when she was talking about Jean-Baptiste Bissile and like the frame story for the Tale of Tales. And I'm like, oh, yes, I know this story. Oh, yeah, we did a podcast episode on this, like these tales. And oh, yeah, I know all about like the three citrons. Keep going. So that was exciting too while I was reading, just realizing how much we've done like on the podcast, like how many stories we've like gone over and covered, but then also how many stories we still haven't mined for content yet.
Heck yeah.
But I can't wait to show you, Geoff, how much I've marked up this book. But I'm excited about this episode that we're going to do today because, and true story, this episode was almost part of the Stone Soup episode.
Oh.
But I was getting so much information on this and so much information on Stone Soup at the same time that I was like, no. Now this is going to turn into like this really long, convoluted, all over the place episode. It's getting like wildly out of hand. And so I was like, you know what? No, I'm going to save this episode, but we'll put them out next to each other because they go together. And I'll tell you in a little bit how it relates to Stone Soup, but I wanted to say that today we are going to be talking about the wise men of Gotham and towns full of fools. Now, Jeffrey, what do you think of when I say the name of Gotham?
I am Batman. That's what I think of.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And would you believe me if I told you that Gotham City in Batman is named after a folkloric town of fools?
That is pretty appropriate.
Yeah.
But I would not believe you. I would believe that whoever invented Batman was the one that came up with it, and that someone took a time machine back in time and then gave it to this other story.
What's even wilder to me is that it went from this like Wise Men of Gotham story like trope to Batman by way of Washington Irving of the Sleepy Hollow
That
fame.
I love that. I love that journey for the city of Gotham. and for all of us that get to experience that journey now. I have not experienced it. Just the thought of the journey is delightful.
It's so exciting. So while I was doing research for our last episode about Stone Soup, I was reminded that there are several variants of the Stone Soup tale type that take place inside of a town of fools. Because again, like we talked about on the Stone Soup episode, a lot of those variants include like smart people coming through and then tricking easily gullible people. And so sometimes that story takes place in like a proverbial like town of fools because people who were telling the tale were like, oh, where would this scenario most likely happen? In a town of fools, a town of people who are like easily gullible.
Idiotsville, USA.
We're going to talk about Idiotsville, USA, actually, in a minute. A lot of people call it Florida.
Oh.
That's a funny joke to us because it works on the same level that like the majority of these stories work. So while I was researching for Stone Soup and finding like, oh yeah, some of these, of course, they take place in these like town of fools situations, I realized that we've never officially done an episode talking about Town of Fools. And I even went back and I listened to our episode about the moon being made of cheese because I could have sworn that we retold a story that was about some men who thought that they had caught and trapped the moon in a rain barrel and tried to sell it. And I thought that that story took place in like the European Jewish town of fools, which is called Chelm. And not only did we not talk about Chelm, but I didn't even retell that story in the moon cheese episode. Very disappointed myself.
Wow.
After almost 5 years of podcasting, I truly can't remember which stories that I've heard and read and which ones have made it into episodes.
You've actually talked about.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And not to further complicate it too, but it's like there's stories and stuff that you've like retold to me and like talked to me about like in a similar way that we talk about the podcast. So it's like, wait, when was that a time that we were just talking as friends about these things? And when was it like actual podcast recording?
Or when was something like a message that I've sent you being like, guess what horrible thing I just read?
Because there have been a lot of those. But yeah, it's crazy that we haven't talked about it. Or we didn't talk about it when you thought you had. I could have told you that we did not well, I wouldn't have trusted my own memory. I do remember we talked about the moon appearing in a barrel.
Yeah.
I don't remember anything about like dudes trying to sell it.
Yeah. I think the majority of the episode was talking about animals like fox and wolf and moons, wells, water like reflecting in a well, stuff like that. It just, we didn't get around to it. So I thought that today would be an excellent time to talk about towns of fools. And I thought that we would start in Gotham because these towns usually, there are a lot of town of fools in stories and they get kind of labeled under like the Wise Men of Gotham trope, even though they take place like all over the place. So I thought that we'd start there before we will be moving backwards in time by quite a lot. I hope everybody's excited for time travel.
I'll get the DeLorean started up.
So I'm going to start by telling you the story of the Wise Men of Gotham. I'm getting this tale from a book called Noodles, Nimwits, and Numbskulls by Maria Leach.
Sounds like an amazing book.
And this book was written in 1961, but this story is much older than that. It gets referenced just in name alone in a couple different like nursery rhymes because it was just kind of this like well-known story. And so you could just like make reference to it. So the story was said to have taken place in, I think like in like the 1300s, but the story is not necessarily that old. That's just where storytellers placed it that far back in the time of King John. So it was once said that the wise men of Gotham were a bunch of fools. Noodles and nitwits and numbskulls, some people would call them. The title of the book. They're the titular numbskulls.
Love when we have a titular character make their appearance.
So back in the time of King John and his reign, it was believed that anytime he wanted to like pass through a certain area, anytime that he kind of wanted to make an area a regular place for his hunting and traveling, they would have to turn that area into an established road and byway, which usually meant that now more traffic is going through your town, which means they're taking farmland away from farmers so that they can be hunting grounds for the king and all of his people. They're, just like generally causing mayhem, ruining everything. The people of Gotham did not want the city of Gotham or the town of Gotham to become a place that had a big public road. And so what they decided to do was that they were going to make it so that the king did not want to travel through their town. And so when they heard that like kind of a royal party, like a pre-entourage group was going to be arriving, they had like a quick town meeting and decided on a plan. And so when that entourage got there and was like looking around, they're checking out the neighborhood, looking at the town, and they look over and they see that there's like a group of men in the middle of trying to drown an eel in the town pond.
Come on, guys.
And they're like, what in the world? And then they saw a group of workmen who were shoveling, it looked like nothing, into like a wheelbarrow. So they went over to them and they're like, what are you guys doing? And they're like, oh, we're shoveling sunshine into these barrels and we're taking it into the church because it's really dark in there and we're trying to lighten it up. So we're just taking these wheelbarrows full of sunlight and bringing them in there. The king's entourage are like, what in the world? Oh, these guys, there's something wrong with them. So then they walk over to this other group who are standing beside a garden wall who are like crying and complaining. And they're like, oh no, oh man, that's the worst. And the king's entourage are like, wait, what's going on? Like, what are you guys freaking out about? And they're like, well, we saw that there was this beautiful like cuckoo bird that was sitting in this tree and we wanted to trap him there so that we'd have summer all year round because they're always here in the summertime. We wanted to trap it here. And so we were trying to build this wall and we thought that we'd build it high enough, but the bird just flew right out. So I guess we didn't make the walls around it high enough to trap it in. And the king's men are like, what in the world? These guys, they're all idiots. What in the world? And then they kept walking and they see a bunch of men that are standing around this lake. For the sake of the story, I'm like, listen, there's 12 men that they see standing around this lake. But then this whole shenanigan like goes on and on forever. So I'm like, I won't put us through the whole shenanigan. But anyway, what the shenanigan was these men are standing, they're soaking wet and they're standing next to the river and they're searching in the river. They're searching everywhere in the river. And so the king's men come up to them and they're like, what's going on, guys? And they're like, oh, we're really, one of our friends is lost. We can't figure out who it is, but we were all swimming together and like he must have fallen in and we can't find him. Maybe got swept down river. We're looking for him, trying to find him. And they're like, oh, okay. Like, how do you know that you're missing somebody? And they're like, well, because there were 12 of us and I counted out and there's just 11 of us. And the king's men were like, wait, what? And so the guy's like visibly counting out like all of them. And he's like, yeah, we were all swimming in the river together. And I see my friend over here. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. There's just 11. And then another guy was like, oh, maybe you counted wrong. Let me try. So the other guy, he does the same thing. He counts all of them out. And so the king's men finally, after every single one of these men takes a turn and they all like count to 11. One of the king's men was like, oh, you know what? I think I found the 12th person. And they're like, oh, really? Where'd you find him? Where'd you find him? And he's like, here, let me show you. And he basically was like, all right, when I whip you, you count count off, and he like takes like a horse whip and like whips one guy, and the guy's like 1, and then like whips him again 2, and
That's hilarious.
and then like counts all like 12, and they're like, "Oh, you found all of us," and the guy was like, "Yeah, you idiots, you weren't counting yourselves," and they're like, "Oh, we didn't even like think of that," and he's like, "All right, what in the world?" So after that, all of like the king's men kind of like got together, and they're like, "Okay, what did you see happen?" So they're all like comparing notes about like the nuttery that they all watched go on. And so they were like, you know what? We need to go tell the king about this. I don't think any of us should be traveling through here. Like these people are idiots. And so they went back to King John and said like, hey, you know what? I don't think we're going to have any luck going out here. There's no reasoning with the men of Gotham. They're just like a bunch of fools. And so I think we need to avoid it. And so after that, the people were always called either the wise men of Gotham or the fools of Gotham. Because, yeah, they wanted everybody to think that they were fools, so they'd stay away from them, which makes them pretty wise.
Nice.
So when this story would be referenced, like when it started to just be referenced, like it was such a well-known story that it would just get referenced by name only, by like title only. And so because people would either say like the wise fools of Gotham, the fools of Gotham, instead of the wise men of Gotham, slowly it became like when you'd be referencing somebody who was playing dumb on purpose.
Right.
But over time, because you weren't kind of saying the full meaning, or the full meaning wasn't being translated necessarily all the way to the person who was hearing it, it kind of morphed into this misnomer.
Right.
I don't even think that's like the right word.
There's like people just started using it.
Yeah,
wrong.
people just started using it wrong. Instead of it being the idea of these guys pretending to be dumb, it just became these guys are dumb.
Yeah.
And so when people would reference it, they would be like, oh, the wise men, sarcastically, the wise men of Gotham, or like, oh yeah, the fools of Gotham.
Interesting. That kind of reminds me of the whole thing with Bugs Bunny, like calling Elmer Fudd Nimrod. Have you heard about this thing? It's like Nimrod now is like
an idiot.
An idiot. Yeah, it's like something we say for an idiot.
But wasn't he like a person in the Bible or something?
It's someone in the Bible who's a hunter. And so like, I guess, I can't remember. Honestly, I don't remember Nimrod from the Bible, but I remember hearing this story, which may not be true. But I mean, it's that like he was a hunter in the Bible. And so he's like saying it sarcastically because Elmer Fudd is a hunter. He's like, oh yeah, way to go, Nimrod. You like great, awesome hunter guy. Like mocking him. But then now when we say Nimrod, all we think about is that it means idiot. It's like a similar kind of situation where it's just like, oh, we use it in the way that it means idiot now because of us misunderstanding what the cartoon was doing. And apparently not reading the Bible enough.
But yeah, it basically, because people weren't fully understanding the reference, they thought that it meant something that it didn't. So now, bringing it back to Batman for a second, as we should. Yeah. So when Washington Irving of Legend of Sleepy Hollow fame started a Lampoon magazine with some of his friends, making fun of the people and the culture of New York City. This magazine was a lot like Mad Magazine, where like it was satire. And that's why I said it was a lampooning magazine. We all got it. We all understood. Yeah. But anyway, so it was this like satirical magazine making fun of the people and the culture of New York City. And he called New York City Gotham.
In reference to like them being dumb.
Yes.
Interesting. Because I did know that like that was a thing that people called New York City.
So he was like the first person in his magazine, which only was in publication for I think like a year, maybe a year and a half, because of arguments about like printing. It's fine.
I was like, because he pissed off the people of New York, and they
no, it was his like little friendship group. Somebody got upset. I think it was like they felt like they weren't being paid enough for it or something. But anyway, so it kind of like fell apart. But yeah, he wanted to make reference to the fact that the city of New York City was like a town of fools because they weren't like self-aware enough to know that they were basically acting like caricatures of themselves, which rude, but also like sometimes like, you know, I think we've all seen, I feel this way about some cities like Los Angeles. You meet some people and you're like, oh, that person is so LA.
Yeah.
And because they're a caricature of themselves. And so, yeah, he basically was like, the New York City, they're a town of fools. Like, they're not even aware of just like how ridiculous they seem to anybody from outside of New York City who like comes in. And so he called New York City Gotham. And when Milton Bill Finger, which is the real name of a person.
Of the person that invented Batman. Not invented, but I guess invented. You don't invent, you just create.
When he was like co-creating the Batman comics, he named it Gotham because of that connection. And there are even points in the history of the comic, like within itself, that make reference to that connection. So even in like the DC universe, they are aware.
The folklore of the idiots of Gotham is alive and kicking.
Because like he knew that what the city that they were creating, one, it's a lot like New York City. There's a lot of that New York City like flavor, like in the city of Gotham. And also the city of Gotham is like home to a bunch of like criminally insane people.
Yeah.
Not that they're not just in Arkham, they're all over the place.
Yeah. Including the man in the mask. Well, I mean, there are a lot of people in masks, but I'm talking about Batman, you know. Yeah. You get what I'm saying. So here's the thing I'm not clear. I think you said this, but I'm not exactly sure. So the like Bill Finger was aware of like the full like folkloric meaning of like idiots of Gotham, wise men of Gotham. Like
he both knew and appreciated Washington Irving comparing the two, and he was in agreement. But he also was aware of the European town of fools concept.
Right. Like the actual meaning, the actual original intended meaning.
Especially because like it, again, like it's found in like parts of like some nursery rhymes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd be interested in hearing because I like you say that, and not that I know every nursery rhyme that has ever been written, but I can't think of any that talk about Gotham.
Yeah. So they're in a nursery rhyme that was called Three Sailors of Gotham. And it's three wise men of Gotham they went to sea in a bowl. And if the bowl had been stronger, my song would have been longer. Didn't say it was a great nursery rhyme.
I understand why I've never heard it.
Mostly because I think, you know, like if we had heard it, we would have been like, what?
Yeah.
Rub-a-dub-dub. Three men in a tub.
Just as relevant today as it was back then. Maybe more so.
So, yes. So when people see Wise Men of Gotham, 100% you should be thinking of Batman. That would make the most sense for you. But also, it's related to folklore. Now, moving swiftly back in time to the 4th century AD.
Nice. Love a time jump, especially a backwards one.
To one of the first joke books ever written.
Ooh, love that.
Isn't it wild to think that like one of the first joke books ever written was like the 4th century AD?
Yeah.
For me, thinking about it, I'm just like, it's just insane. Like how much people are the same now as they ever were. But now that I say that,
you're going to read like a really unrelatable joke from this book.
No, one of the things, so the reason why I'm like bringing up this joke book is because there's this whole kind of series inside the book. I'm probably going to pronounce the name of this book incorrectly because it's Philogilus. Philogilus. Philogilus.
You know what? I think you nailed it.
The name means the laughter lover or the lover of laughs. And the book itself, it gets named after the compilers, except they don't really know who the names of the compilers are.
So how does that work?
Yeah, because it was kind of said like, oh, the book is written by
unknown,
like Heraclius and Philogrius, except like Philogrius meaning like a laughter lover.
Oh.
And so it's like, is that a joke name or did somebody actually name their kid a laughter lover? Probably not. And so
I mean, I'm going to if I have another one
Yep,
now.
you're going to have to. So the reason why this book gets brought up right now is because there's like a section inside of that book about the people from the ancient city of Abdera in Thrance, Greece.
You're just making up stuff. There's not a place called Thrance.
Thrance. Thrace. Thrance. And so the term of like Abdera, it can also refer to the followers of the Abdera philosophical school. Basically, like the idea is that these people were making fun of how people would go to this city to go to school in this philosophical school, and they would get so book learned and scholarly that they would lose all of their like actual common sense. And that like they like, oh, you guys are so in your heads hoity-toity that they are idiots now. Like it's come like full circle. Right. Which I feel like that's, again, I'm like, that's one of those things that it's how I feel about some people who like go to like LA.
Wow. LA's really taken some hits in this conversation.
No, where not in terms of like, oh, they go there to get like so smart, but they get so smart that they like go backwards. They're just like some people that are in LA. And again, this isn't all of it or like the whole scene, but like people who go and they think that they're getting like all like new agey brilliant, but really when they're talking, they just sound like they are on too many shrooms. And you're like, you think that you're making a lot of good sense, but like you aren't. And again, like I'm like, these are all stereotypes. These are all like of like, oh, that person's like different than me, or like the way that they talk is so different from the way that like I'm used to communicating, even though we should be sharing like a similar language. They now are like different from me, and I want to make fun of like their pretentiousness or, you know, whatever. And I feel like in a way, I know that as more Californians are moving to places in like the US, a lot of people have been kind of like making jokes about kind of like how differently they think or.
Yeah. I hadn't consciously noticed that, but you saying that, I'm like, yeah, it does seem like that is on the rise.
Yeah. I mean, it's because it's like LA's really, or like not just LA, but like all of California is really expensive to live in. And people are like moving out. But with that is also going with like their culture of living in California, and it rubs some people the wrong way if they aren't from there, or they think like, oh, you think because you're from California that you're so much better than me, or that you like, you know about sushi burritos, and so you think our town is backwards because we don't have a sushi burrito shop.
Oh man, I want a sushi
I know,
burrito
I just
now. I haven't had one. My town doesn't have one.
Oh, I used to live in Vegas, and we definitely had sushi burritos.
Doesn't have a sushi burrito shop, to my knowledge.
We definitely did.
You think you're better than me?
I do. You live by the ocean. You guys should have sushi burritos.
Yeah, it doesn't
It's
make
because you don't. I'm like, you haven't had enough Asian American influence.
Yeah, being on the opposite side of the country from, you know,
that's
Asia.
rough. I wouldn't. But it's wild because it's like I'm looking at this book from like 4th century AD, and they're making fun of like that concept.
Yeah.
Of like, oh, these people think that they're so great and so brilliant, but really they're all like a bunch of idiots. And so for your enjoyment, for your pleasure, I will, first of all, not all of these jokes are bangers, is what I want you to know. So like, here is a taste of some of these jokes, ones that I felt were like closer to like our brand of humor that we could appreciate. So one day an intellectual was told by somebody, oh, it looks like your beard is coming in. And so he went to the rear entrance or the back door to wait for it. Another intellectual asked him what he was doing. Once he heard the whole story, he said, I'm not surprised that people say we lack common sense. How do you know that it's not coming through the other gate? People have pointed out that joke also might have homoerotic connotations to it, but they're not totally sure.
Right.
Because the reason why they think that it might have like homoerotic connotations, not just because he was waiting in the rear entrance.
It's like, I think it's pretty obvious.
Geoff was like,
Katrina.
nah, I got it, Katrina. Like, he was waiting for it to come in the back door. We got it, Katrina. We understood. Is that it was kind of like understood that once boys were like becoming men, they kind of gave up those like homosexual relationships of their youth. And one of the signs that you were like becoming a man and giving up like, you know, your boyhood, that you were like a child, was that you would start growing facial hair. Like that, like, yeah.
Yeah.
And so they're like, oh, okay. Somebody was like, oh, your beard's coming in. And then he's like, oh, let me go to the back door and like wait for it then. But then, yeah. So here's another one that, Geoff, I don't think that you'll appreciate that one. Well, okay, listen, I want people to know that also, I'm like, before I start, I do want people to know that like in ancient Greece, something that was considered like okay was if you had a baby and you didn't want a baby, you could like leave it abandoned out in a field.
Yikes.
And just like let nature take its course. We see this in the story of Oedipus.
Mm-hmm.
And we also see other things in the story of Oedipus that Geoff doesn't like. So, an intellectual got a slave pregnant. At the birth, his father suggested that the child just be killed. And the intellectual replied, first, murder your own children, and then tell me to kill mine. The joke being that he is the child.
He'd be dead, and he wouldn't be able to murder anyone. So at least the baby would be safe.
This one I really, really liked and appreciated to like how like dumb this person was. Which, yeah, all right. An intellectual came to check in on a friend who was seriously ill. When the man's wife said that he had departed, the intellectual replied, when he arrives back, will you tell him that I stopped by?
That is a good one.
That reminds me of like people who have been talking to somebody and they're like, "Oh, I'm sorry that I like didn't come out for drinks this weekend. We lost my aunt." And they're like, "Oh my gosh, did you find her?" And it's like, "Oh, no." No, that's not what we meant. So, and I'm like, here's some that are specifically like Abderites where they say it like pretty plainly. So an Abderite saw a eunuch talking with a woman and asked him if she was his wife. When the man replied that eunuchs can't have wives, the Abderite asked, so is she your daughter? Hilarious.
Oh, man.
So this idea of like lumping people together, especially from like a specific locale, and labeling them as like idiots, or like the whole group are just like a town of idiots, and they kind of become like the butt of jokes.
Yeah. There's
a long history there of people doing that, of saying, oh, this group of people, we recognize that they're like us, but they're not totally like us, or like we're better in some way, which is why I brought up at the beginning of the podcast, like Florida, because that, even though I was going hard on California back there, like the idea of like Florida Man has kind of like just, it's become this running joke in the US where like we understand that like some bad behavior or weird behavior or whatever, obviously there's humans capable of that all over the place, like, of course. But anytime we have like a news story that starts off with like a Florida man this weekend, we're all like, what happened? And it could be anything from like saved a dog from an alligator to, shot meth up his butt. Like, we don't know what sentence is about to happen. Like, there's no knowing, because it is this like trope that we've all kind of noticed coming out of news headlines, but then it became this kind of running joke where people would make memes and stuff of Florida Man, to the point where there are some folklorists that are like, is Florida Man a cryptid? Or
That's interesting. I love it. I vote yes. If you have to ask if it's a cryptid, it is. I do love how it's like also become sort of a thing. You touched on it, but like it's like a single person is doing all of these things. And that's kind of like a lesser element. I feel like it's kind of goes both ways as far as like, oh, it's just like it's a type of cryptid, like a chupacabra, not like Bigfoot, which is or the Yeti was a good example. It's like there are many Yetis around potentially, or Sasquatches, but there's only one Bigfoot.
Yes.
So it's like, but I mean, that is also kind of different, but whatever. I like to personally think that it's just like this one insane dude is doing all of these things, saving puppies, but also like the one that keeps going. I don't want to say it, but I'm going to anyway, but it's like eating people's faces
off, the bath salts one, that it wasn't really bath salts. He was like schizophrenic.
You're like saving puppies 1 minute, doing like just the worst possible crimes against humanity the next.
You like to believe that that's just one dude instead of a whole like town, a whole city of fools.
Yeah. Well, yeah, maybe it's like a protective mechanism, because it's like, I don't want there to be many of this person out there. I just want there to be one, and like us to know where he is and avoid him. I also heard, I don't know if it's true, and this is just an interesting thing. It's one of those things that I probably heard on a podcast and didn't verify. So, go and verify this for yourself before you start spreading it around on your podcast. Do as I say, not as I do. But it has something to do, like the reason why so many of these like Florida Man stories get out has something to do with like how the public records are accessed or something. Like in any state, well, I don't know about any state, but it's like in a lot of states, like arrest records and things like that are public record. Like you can go and see that. But I heard that it's something to do with like just the ease of access. Like you don't have to like go to the courthouse and like ask for things. Like you can just like get online or whatever. I don't know what the case is. And that's why there's so many of these stories, because people are, these weird, crazy things are happening everywhere. Yeah. They're probably even more happening in like even more populated. Well, I mean, Florida's a pretty populated state, but like California, which, it's great that you insulted that the most populous state in all of the country. So people from there will stop listening to our podcast. It's like there's probably way more instances of these crazy things happening in California or in like New York City.
Oh yeah.
But like but we're just not hearing about them because it's easy to like access that information.
So I will say, like, what's the opposite of like when you fact check somebody, but you're fact checking and verifying that they're correct? Because
fact checking, you can fact check and verify.
No, I've only heard fact checking as in a negative, in a connotation.
Well, I mean, you only like really, it only becomes important and relevant when
that's true.
Found to be false. Well, that's not necessarily true, but it's like typically.
I was just going to say that, yes, like the reason why like the meme of Florida Man took off was because of freedom of information laws in Florida. It made it easier for journalists to get a hold of information about the arrest records. And then CNN apparently did kind of like an even deeper dive into like why this got so big. And basically some of like the things that CNN pointed out were the exact same thing of like public record laws, the way that they are made it easier to access like police reports. And so when people were when journalists were looking for something to, write about the news, if it sounded catchy, something that would pull readers in and get them to like buy a magazine or click on an article or whatever it was, they would like publish it, even if the only thing that they had was just like one police record that was like, oh, this man like fought an alligator to the death and then brought it to like the family barbecue or whatever. Like they were like, oh, that's the whole story is like that. But if it got people to click through, then it was good and it was like encouraging them. But CNN also said like other factors were like, it is a highly populated state. They do have like a kind of like a mental health funding issue. And so they're like, part of it is that there is a lot of drug trafficked through here. And so it was like many things that caused the like Florida Man to like take off. But also, just that it became so ubiquitous, like the headline, like Florida Man, blah, 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 like that it turned into like just a meme of itself because it was always Florida Man, Florida Man, Florida Man. Because they weren't saying like
the person's name because it means nothing
they're not
to
like,
us.
I almost said Ted Danson as if that was like a nobody name. I'm sorry, Ted Danson. My brain was just like, think of a plain normal person name, Ted Danson. If they just said that like Bob Smith grabbed an alligator this weekend, who's going to click on that? They're like, I don't know who Bob Smith is. I don't care what Bob Smith does. But they're like, Florida Man. And they're like, Florida? What happened in Florida? But anyway, so yes, this kind of idea of this locale creates idiots has been this like long running stereotype joke. And people embrace it. It also, what it does is it allows people, because what is so interesting is that usually like this trope, it's like kind of what I said about like, we're similar to these people. We're from the same country. We share a lot of the same cultural values, but for some reason they're idiots and we're not, or like they're like pretentious jerks and like, but we're not, but we can make fun of them because we're also American. And so like we can like rag on them and it's fun. This idea, I want to like keep reiterating is it's different from when you are like hating on outsiders and us versus them. There still is that kind of like us versus them, but
it's more us than them.
Yeah.
The mix is like, it's the same thing as I think probably everyone is thinking this already, but I'm going to say it because I'm here and I have a microphone in front of my mouth and you don't.
Stop giving men microphones.
Like with your siblings, you know? Like your siblings, like you make fun of your siblings like all day long, like just relentlessly, like saying they're ugly, they're stupid, they're all this stuff. The minute someone else insults your sibling, you're like, I'm going to punch that person in the face. I'm going to knock their teeth out. Like no one talks about my brother, sister, whatever, sibling that way. But it's like, except for me, like 5 minutes ago, but it's like,
or even like if you take it like a couple steps out where it's just like my cousins, where it's like we share family, like we share blood. Because like we're cousins, but my cousins are crazy. Everybody's like, cousins. I love how many jokes there are online of like people are like me and my sibling when we get in the car after a family reunion, and it's like the faces of them being like, "Oh, get a load of those guys."
Yeah.
I feel like it's like a pretty standard thing that like you love your cousins. You're absolutely like. That same kind of sibling thing of like, no one's allowed to make fun of my cousins and I love them till like the end of the world. But sometimes some of them, they be saying crazy stuff. And I know that they probably get in their family cars and are like, geez, get a load of those pretentious jerks.
Yeah.
Based on a true story.
It's interesting too, because it's like, it feels kind of like I'm coming back to my, observation of the ratio of us and them.
Yeah.
Like sibling is like very us, a little them. Cousin is pretty us.
Yeah, pretty us.
Pretty them. You know, it's like it gets to a point where like when the them outweighs the us, because it's like we're all human beings. You know, we all are us on this whole planet. But it's like it's one of those things. It's like it tips over the edge into not just like playful fun and acceptable to being like, now that's actually like kind of a harmful thing that you're doing, which is just fascinating to me.
Because I'm like, I do want to point out, I know some of my cousins are probably listening to this right now.
You're not the ones that she's talking about.
No, they know.
You're not.
They know what they've said about me, and they they probably know kind of what I've been saying about them.
I do want to point out, I don't really feel this way about my cousins. I feel very like I don't feel like my cousins are that crazy or weird.
No, listen, because I'm like when I say that, I also am very much like they're not. They're weird in the same. I feel like it's the same in the way that like when I'm with my siblings, I'll rag on my siblings.
Yeah.
who are also listening to this podcast.
As children, my family doesn't listen to this podcast. I could say whatever I want about them.
Nice.
Just
I have a
kidding.
list of things I want to say about your family. Just that I love them.
So, especially as children, it's one of those things where the differences become very like stark with your cousins. Like they are similar to you. Even like lots of family culture things are similar because of maybe whatever, like your grandparents or whatever. Like your parents were all raised by the same people, so they kind of are some flavors of the same. But you know, like the same as going over to like a friend's house and like they do things differently. Like they use like placemats or something, or like they don't put knives out. They only put like spoons out instead of like a whole set of silver or whatever the case may be. It's like, and that stands out really starkly to you as a child because like you only really have your very limited experiences. But like when it's family, it's like those things are more similar, but like those differences really stand out even more than your siblings because like you're in that same environment. It's like you go to, especially you're going to that other place or like they're coming to your area where they're not as familiar with things. It's like their differences really stand out because they don't do what's normal according to you because it's all that you've experienced. And then they're in this place like, wow, they don't do normal things. They're doing it the wrong way here, you know?
But yeah, in that same way of like I love what you said of like, they're more us than they are them in that scenario, whether it's like comparing it to like siblings or cousins or whatever.
And obviously this depends on like every family's different. Some people are like much closer to their cousins. Some are much closer to cousins on one side than the other or whatever. You know, it's like obviously there's a lot of variability in there as well. So we're speaking like very broad
because I'm like,
strokes.
I'm thinking like even in terms of like if you went even outside of like talking about like family analogies, when you go to like maybe schools, I know people's like high schools have like heavy rivalries where they're like, oh yeah, like our school, we're excellent at sports or like we're high in academics and we always beat them in whatever activity or whatever. Oh, their school, nothing good ever comes out of their school. Nobody bubble. Like there's that weird like school rivalry. Even it's like you live in the same city. You all shop at the same Kroger. Like, what is this beef that you're having like with each other? Like, how really different are you when like you throw a stone and you're, I guess, in a different zip code, but
like school,
not but you have this like hardcore like beef. It's distinctions like that in these stories. And so instead of like in some of our tales where we're talking about like, oh, these stories are based on harsh racial stereotypes. No, these stories are people saying we're all German, but like those guys who live in, I'm trying to remember what the name of it, Schleidelberger.
Wow. You've now offended the entire country of Germany.
I probably was pronouncing that
who will
right.
no longer listen to our podcast.
Because a Schleidelberger is a resident of Schneidel.
Schneidelberg.
Or Schneidel. Schneider. Schneider. Schneida.
Yeah, I think your pronunciation is getting worse the harder you try. Not that I know.
But that would be like the German town of fools that they have. There's one in like the Netherlands.
Idiotsville, USA.
Idiotsville, USA. Finnish, Romanian. And so I love that there's like also it's like ancient Greek towns of like fools where I'm like, yeah, because we've been doing this for like a hot minute.
Idiotopolis.
What was interesting was tales from like ancient Jewish culture. Their Nazareth was like, that was the town of fools.
Interesting.
But in Europe, for European Jews, the city of Chelm became the town of fools. So that town actually exists in Poland, but it's not necessarily,
It's not that town that they're talking about.
Not necessarily, but then kind of, it did kind of like become like the joke. There have been papers, there have been books like written on like how it came to be. And one of the theories is that there were some cities in Europe that were known to have like a higher percentage of Jewish people. And in this town in Poland, apparently it was like 50% Jewish.
Oh, wow.
And so that is the theory of why that town became like oh, except for that group over there. And again, I do want to point out that like the stories are, don't worry, we will talk about anti-Semitic stories, in other podcast episodes, but that's not this. This is Jewish people making fun of other Jewish people. And if you weren't telling this story, but the butt of the joke was because like then it does become anti-Semitic.
Oh man.
But we're going to be retelling stories that were told by Jewish people for Jewish people. And also interesting twist on this whole dynamic. A lot of these stories, they were used to like teach wisdom lessons. And so some of these tales became tales that they were like, no, this is a story that you're likely to hear a rabbi tell. So that they'd be like, obviously we can see that this is foolish behavior and here's why this is foolish behavior. So they were used religiously for like didactic purposes. And there are even some of them that in them, the way that the characters are like arguing or going back and forth with each other is kind of like modeled off of the way that like rabbis would take different sections of scripture or logic to like argue against each other. And so the stories of Chelm like very much became a way to laugh with and learn with themselves, like engage with themselves through lighthearted, fun stories. I'm going to have Geoff tell the story of how this town came to be, and it is traditionally called variations on the Jar of Fools or a Jar of Fools, the Fool Jar, things like that. Oh, and I'll shout out the book that Geoff is going to be getting this story from. So this book is called The Jar of Fools, 8 Hanukkah Stories from Chelm, and it is written by Eric A. Kimmel. And the stories in it, they're a mix of stories written by Eric A. Kimmel out of his own mind. There are some where he's taken other town of fool tales and put them in Chelm and like that setting. And then there are a couple in here that are just traditional stories like The Jar of Fools. And so, yeah, if people want to like look up this book, it is made for children and to be fun stories to tell around Hanukkah. So, yeah, shout out this book, A Jar of Fools.
I love the way that this story, The Jar of Fools, starts. It has like a great opening line, which, you know what? It seemed great to me. This is something I love about this podcast is by the time it gets to me retelling the story that I've like already read and like prepared, I've learned so much more that I experience the story differently as I'm retelling it on the podcast. Like so many more things already like make sense. And I'm like, oh, I get it. And like, it takes a little bit of the magic of this first line away, which is everyone knows that Chelm is a town of fools, which I just thought that they were just like, they were giving us that information brand new, but no, they're just stating a fact.
Everybody knows
like,
this.
That is true. It's like everybody knows. Like they didn't even say it, but they say that. Everyone knows that Chelm is a town of fools, or so it is said. But the narrator posits, the question is, if the people of Chelm are truly as foolish as everyone believes that they are, and if that's true, how did so many of these dang fools get gathered into one place? And why would that dang place be Chelm? So, according to one legend, this happened a long, long time ago, right here on planet Earth, not in a galaxy far, far away. Just after Adam and Eve left the Garden of Eden. And God was looking down from heaven and he was seeing that the number of humans in the world was growing and they were going to start spreading all over the world. And so all these new human beings that were going to be born would need souls, which I thought that was like I don't know. They had some sort of like twisting of religious ideas in my brain. Like it's the chicken and the egg sort of a thing. It's like, does the soul come before the body or does the body come before the soul? It's like, oh, there's a body being created. We better get a spirit down in there. This seems to be saying that.
Or maybe he was like, oh, if we keep having more people, I'm running out of my like back stash of souls.
Yeah, like, oh, inventory's getting low.
Got to ramp up production. But no, it seems like, no, because I don't know. Yeah, theology, love it. What I was thinking of theologically when I was like reading this story was like the idea of like God making people that had so many negative qualities. Like if he's making the souls, like maybe don't
Right.
make
Like, why is he intentionally making? Why did he make idiots in the first place?
Why'd you make like dishonest people, or like why'd you make just cull them from the herd? Yikes. Anyway, back away from theology. Back away from theology.
So God made a big kettle in the sky, using the Big Dipper as a spoon and the Little Dipper as a ladle. Which, okay, does that seem backwards to anyone else? The Big Dipper as a spoon, the Little Dipper as a ladle?
Yeah. Ladle, ladle, ladle.
Anyway.
I made it out of stars. That was a joke about the dreidel song. Yeah.
Dreidel.
Thank you.
I got it. It just...
I love that you're like, one of us had a Jewish grandmother, Katrina.
And it wasn't you.
Not me.
Using the Big Dipper as a spoon and the Little Dipper as a ladle, he mixed up a huge number of souls in this great big kettle in the sky. And some of these souls liked to fight. They liked to quarrel. They liked to tussle. They liked to get some wrestling in. But others were peaceful. And God looked at these souls and he's like, dang, you know what? It's not good to have like all the souls that are itching for a fight in one place. Just so that, you know, all the peaceful souls could be in another one. If that were to happen, then there would be no one in this like country of fighting people that would be able to like temper that aggression. They just like go on the rampage. And the peaceful nations would have nobody to defend them because they'd just be so peaceful they wouldn't fight back and they would just get mowed over by these like quarrelsome folks. So it's better that we distribute these souls evenly across the earth so that every country will have citizens that value peace, and they'll also have citizens that are capable of waging war, and it'll just be a good balance. So he put the quarrelsome souls in one jar, peaceful souls in another, and he gave each jar to an angel and said, go and spread these souls all over the earth and make sure that you don't, dump too many of the same kind in one place. And so the angels did what God said, and God looked down and saw that it was good. And so he took the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper in hand once again and mixed up another batch of souls. And this time, some of them came out honest and some dishonest. To your point before, too, it seems like he's not making them that way. It's just like the way that the
souls came out. So either bake them better or cull the herd. Oh, just kidding.
Instead of like throwing out the batch like right from the beginning, it's like, well.
I like how I'm like advocating for like cosmological eugenics.
Yeah, it's pretty messed up.
Pretty messed up, Katrina.
So once again, God's looking at these souls and he's like, you know what, man, it's not good for all of these souls to be in one place either. So he's like, justice and honor can't, it's not a good environment for it to thrive if everyone in that nation is like just an absolute scoundrel and a scamp and a rapscallion. There have to be some honest folk there to help temper and control the dishonest ones. And that's the only way that like honor and justice will actually even be valued. It's kind of, to me, my own side note thought here. It's like that, you need the contrast to recognize the goodness of those things. Like if you don't have anything to compare it against, it's not even like good. It's just like normal.
And that's what like going back to like that theological arguments like in this story. Yeah, it's this like, wait, well, why is God allowing there to exist this thing that we feel is negative, like a negative quality? Why is he allowing that to exist in the world? And it's like, to create opposition so that you can like realize the opposite that also exists, but that you wouldn't notice in the absence of it.
Yeah. So God put the honest souls into one jar and the dishonest souls into another. Once again, handed each to an angel, said, go and spread them out throughout the world. And they did. And God looked down and saw that it was good. And so God filled up this kettle a third time and made another batch. And this time, some of these souls were wise. Some of them were foolish. And God looked at these souls and he's like, oh man, it's not good. Once again, putting all the wise people in one place, all the foolish people in one place. The wise would become, so like clever and think they're so much better than everyone else that no one else would understand them. They just have all their nerdy little in-jokes. And the fools would just tumble blindly into folly, it says, which I love that. Don't even need specificity. It's like all kinds of folly will be blindly tumbled into. I know that to be true. So let's once again distribute them evenly across the earth like we did with the others. God put the wise souls in a jar, foolish souls in a jar, handed each jar to an angel and said, okay, take these souls, distribute them evenly. Don't let there be too much of either kind in one place or too few in another place. And so the first angel took the jar containing the wise souls and spread those wise souls all over the earth. And that's why Katrina, you may have noticed this or may not have noticed this. There are wise people in every family, in every town, and in every nation. But the angel carrying the jar with the foolish souls was a Butterfingers, which I now understand. When I saw that wording in there, like that was the wording in the book, I was like, this has to be like a fairly
modern retelling.
Retelling. Or my mind is going to be blown when Katrina tells me that the term Butterfingers is actually from 4 AD Greece, which I wish that were true. But anyway, Saint Butterfingers here was flying along with a jar slipped from his hands.
It can't be a saint. It's a Jewish angel.
You're right.
How dare?
You're right. I'm sorry. I was just trying to be funny.
I hope it's a biblically accurate angel.
The Hebrew biblically accurate, which is where like all the stuff about biblically accurate angels does come from too. That's the part of the Bible. So I mean, it probably was, Katrina.
Did it even have fingers? That might be part of the problem. Or maybe it had 5,000 fingers. Its
fingers they were being operated through 5 dimensions. So this third dimensional object, this just happened to like poof, so it fell to the ground and it shattered. And that's how all the foolish souls came to be in one place. And that place is Chelm. But that's not the end of the story, Katrina. You thought it was the end. No, you knew because you've read this before. But you might not have known at home. There's another version of this story. And according to that version of the story, the angel that dropped the jar was not the angel carrying the jar of foolish souls, but the one that was carrying the jar full of wise souls. And that's how the people of Chelm came to be so wise that nobody understands them, which was mentioned earlier in the story. That was the thing that could happen if they got these wise people in one place. But because no one can understand them, everyone else regards these wise people as fools. But are they really? Well, no one can say for sure because nobody knows which version of this story is true. But you can believe that this second version is how they tell it in the town of Chelm.
But I like that idea of like going back to like, are they wise or are they foolish? Are their ways just so above our ways that they look foolish to us?
Yeah, I like that idea a lot too. It's a good thing to ask yourself just as a human being. Like sometimes you'll be like, no, that person is straight up crazy. Like, but it's good to be like, that person sounds crazy. Or maybe not even crazy. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, oh, that doesn't really make sense. But does it make sense because it's like too wise and too smart for you to understand? Or is it because it just really doesn't make sense? It's good to have some humility in that regard. But I also love too, and in light of our whole conversation that we've had so far, like the us versus them of it all, that makes the last bit where they talk about how like they tell the story in Chelm that they're the wise ones and not the foolish ones. In the same way, it's like the other people say that they're the foolish ones because they're the them, but then where the them is the us, they're the wise ones. And so everyone else that's more slightly them is the foolish ones. It's just like, it really is that perspective, which I mean, it's very obvious. I don't know, but it just has a little more like nuance and richness to it now that we've, talked about this as far as like, there's a reason why you can make those like jokes.
I was thinking even going back to, me ragging on my cousins, like the reason why I feel comfortable like bringing it up, even though like it makes it sound like I think that I'm better than my cousins. I'm also acknowledging at the same time that like my cousins look at the way that we might be, me and my like siblings might be, and they think, wow, that's weird. And we all do it to each other, and we can acknowledge that we all do it to each other because we all don't fully see where the other person is coming from, and also we're not fully self-aware either by human being standards. I don't mean like me and my cousins are special because we're not self-aware, like
human beings are not on the whole super self-aware. I mean, you're never fully self-aware.
Nobody can be like fully self-aware about themselves. Like nobody can fully know themselves. And nobody can fully know like another person. And so like in that way, it's like acknowledging that like, yes, people outside of Chelm are like, those are fools. People in Chelm are like, oh, they're fools. Because we're all seeing kind of like past each other. And there's some like wisdom in knowing that.
Is it Chelm or Chelm?
Oh my gosh. Chelm?
I think you said Chelm when you were like listening to the thing.
Chelm. So now I'm going to tell a couple stories that are like quicker, little funny, quippy stories just for the fun of it, so you get kind of a flavor of like how these stories go. And these stories are from Yiddish Folktales by Beatrice Silverman Weinreich. And this is part of the Pantheon Fairy Tale and Folklore Library, if anyone's interested. I love that these ones are listed because they kind of try to group similar stories like together inside of these like big collections. And so this one is Nitwits and Pranksters. Wow. And this book also includes The Angel Spills the Jar of Fools. But I'm not going to be retelling that one because we just heard it. So this one's called A Cat in Chelm. Is that what it's called?
Chelm.
A Cat in Chelm.
Honestly, I think it's Chelm. If I were to guess what I thought it would be, but you like listened to something. And when you listened to something, you then said Chelm.
I'm terrified.
It's okay.
So people in Chelm, they didn't know about cats. And so the town for a while, it was overrun with mice crawling in and out of every hole in the whole entire city. And even at meal times, people in the houses would just hold sticks and brooms so that while he was eating, he could just knock all of the mice away. So one day, a stranger came to Chelm, and looking at what he was seeing, he was like, oh my gosh, what in the world? You guys need a cat. And they were like, wait, what are you talking about? What's a cat? So he describes a cat to them, and he even tells them, you know what? Let me bring you one. And so the stranger came and he brought them this cat, and he charged them some like insane fee for this cat because they thought it was like this very rare. Yes. Yeah. Everybody in Chelm, they, got the money together so they could buy this cat. And they put the cat inside of somebody's house, not realizing how easily cats could run away. So they put it in the house, and they watched with delight as it scared off the mice, as it was grabbing the mice and killing them and getting rid of them. And they were like, oh, wow, this is like working really, really well. Love how easily this is like working out. But then the cat, getting a little bored inside of the one house, once all the mice had gotten scared out, it jumps over to a window, leaps out, and then climbs up onto the roof of the building. So all the people of Chelm, they were like, oh no, we've lost our very expensive cat. How do we get the cat to come back down off of this building? And they're like, I know what we'll do. We'll set the house on fire so that then the cat will have to jump back down to the ground. So they set the house on fire, but then it leapt over from the roof of one house to the roof of another. And so they were like, oh no, what are we going to do? Let's burn it down so that the cat will jump down. So they went over and they set the second house on fire, and it started burning. And then the cat just left from that roof onto a third house. So, of course, they burnt the third house down. And so it went until they destroyed half their town. This one, I love this, very short. It basically is going to be like word for word because it's so short. And it's called the sundial. So the people of Chelm decided that they wanted a sundial. And so they got together and they made a sundial. But then a rainstorm came and dumped water all on top of it. So they decided the only way to fix this problem was to build a roof over the sundial so it wouldn't get wet.
I almost didn't get it because it's so
stupid. Oh man.
Good stuff.
This next one, it's a little grim. Okay.
I feel
it's a little grim, but we are going to remember that these are just stories and nobody's head actually got eaten.
Okay.
We can get through this. I was like, that's dark. Anyway, so there was a shortage of salt in Chelm. And so the people, they didn't know what they were going to do. And so the town people, they got together and they were talking it out, trying to figure out, what are we going to do? We're almost out of salt. And so it says Rabbi, and a Rabbi is a religious leader in like a specific group of Jewish people. I can't remember what the group is, but Rabbi. Because at first I was like, did they spell rabbi wrong? Because I don't know anything. I'm not smart, but it's Rebbe. So it says, then the Rabbi, a mighty thinker, had a thought. But again, he's a Rabbi of Chelm. So anyway, he was like, I know what we'll do. Let's go out into the field and sow some salt. And so the whole town went out into their fields carrying the last of all the salt that they had. No. And they went to work tilling it up, putting in the salt. And after they were done, the Rabbi said that he would stay in the field to watch over their growing crop of salt. And at night, the Rabbi, he laid down to sleep because he, got tired. He's a human being. And as he slept, a wolf came and bit off his head. Again, it's grisly, but it's not real,
and
guys.
Surprising.
This is a story. Yeah, because wolves don't normally just like cleanly bite somebody's head off.
Well, and also it like just comes out of nowhere in the story.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
yeah. But tonally,
like you told me that a head was going to get eaten. I did not expect that to be the moment because it doesn't seem like,
yeah,
there was no foreshadowing.
Yeah. Tonally, that I also like, woo, this is a departure. I say that after they would like burnt down like their entire town. But yeah. But anyway, so wolf came, bit his head off. In the morning, the whole town, they came out to the field because they wanted to see how their salt fields were doing, how the crop was coming along. And they found the headless Rabbi in the field, and they wondered where his head could have gone to. And so they sent messengers to go and get the Rabbi's wife with the question, can you recall whether the Rabbi had a head or no? Did he always look like that? And we've just all forgotten? Or is that new? Is that different? What's going on? We don't know. We can't remember. None of us can recall. And so they asked her that. And then she said, I can't recall either. I also don't remember. Maybe he didn't. So they like went around to like everybody basically like wondering, do you remember if he had a head? Do you remember? Do you remember if this guy and they're like, no, I don't know. And half the people were like, no, he did. He definitely did have a head before. And then the other people were like, no, I don't think that he did. I don't think that that's right. I think he's always looked like that. And they were about to, start a full out fight with each other. Things were going to come to blows until a man from another town, a stranger, happened to be like passing through. And he's like, whoa, 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 whoa. What are all of you guys arguing about? What's going on? And so they told him about the salt fields and the Rabbi and the doubt whether the Rabbi's head was there before or wasn't there. And after this stranger had heard the whole story, he said, well, if your Rabbi was prepared to sow salt, it's proof that he did not have a head. And you can bury him without further ado. And they did.
That's funny.
Yeah. I'm like,
I was wondering how that was going to be relevant to the story.
Yeah. All of that, him having his head bit off was all part of a joke to be like, and these people are stupid enough. It's almost like they don't have brains at all. You can't even tell the difference.
That's the joke.
And I just remembered like another story that was in like a different book where I'm like, oh, you know what? This one, it's short and it's also funny. This one is found in Favorite Folktales from Around the World, also part of that Pantheon Fairy Tale and Folklore library. This one edited by Jane Yolen. Okay, so this story, it's called Chelm Justice. A great calamity befell Chelm one day. The town cobbler murdered one of his own customers. Rough.
What?
Because again, I guess like when they were spreading out those people with the jar of fools, they're all fools in this town, but also some of them might be dishonest or prone to fighting and quarreling because there's a mix. So the cobbler was brought, before the judge to stand trial because you can't just be like murdering your customers. That's like a thing. So the judge sentenced him that he should die by hanging for his crime. But when the verdict was read, most of the townspeople were like, whoa, 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 no, Your Honor, you can't do that. We can't hang this man. You've sentenced to death the only town cobbler that we have. If you hang him, we won't have anybody to mend our shoes. We can't kill him. And the judge was like, oh, you know what? You're making a really good point. That's, that is important. Let me reconsider what we're going to do. And so he thought about it for a minute and he was like, all right, thought about it. Good people of Chelm, what you've said rings true to me. It bears out. So since we only have the one cobbler, it would be wrong for us to hang him to death. So because we have two roofers in the town, we'll hang one of them instead.
So dumb.
Oh my goodness. So this last one that I'm going to retell. I wanted to tell it last because this is one where I feel like it can be used to teach a lesson. Like that if you were a religious leader standing up, you could tell this story to teach people about coming together for the betterment of your city, for your group of peoples, whatever. So it's called A Bridge in Chelm. So there was a river that flowed right through the middle of Chelm. So it had occurred to several different merchants that if there was a bridge connecting both sides of the town to each other, they would do better business. So they were like, you know what? We need to convince everybody that we need to put a bridge over this river. And so they kind of presented that in some town meeting or whatever. And some of the people in the meeting, they disagreed. They objected to the building of this bridge. They said, no, I don't think that we should build this bridge because it would be good for business. We should build it because it would look good aesthetically. It would be so beautiful for the aesthetics of a bridge. A bridge would look so picturesque over this river. So, you know what? I refuse to build a bridge if we're building it because it would be good for business. I only think we should build the bridge if it's for the aesthetics. And we will only contribute to the expenses of building this bridge if it's done for the sake of beauty. And then there was another group of people that were like, a bridge? I mean, I think that it'd be a good idea for us to have a bridge, but not for beauty's sake. That's dumb. Or for the sake of trade. I think it'd be nice to have because it'd provide a place for us to stroll back and forth over. And I would be glad to contribute money to build a bridge for strolling, but not if it's for the aesthetics of a bridge, and definitely not for if it's for increase of trade. And so the three groups began to quarrel, and they're quarreling now still. And in this present day, they still do not have a bridge.
That is a really good one.
Yeah.
For exactly what you're saying. It's like teaching a good lesson. It's like, hey, you're fighting over something that's has lots of benefits. It has all of those benefits. Yeah. But because I don't know. Oh, man.
Because some of the benefits are not the thing that I would get the benefit out of, I don't want you to have that benefit. I only want it to benefit us in this one particular way.
Yeah. Which is it's so ridiculous and over the top, but that's why it makes for a good story. Because it's there are things like that happen where not so completely to the extreme degree, obviously, but it's we will get in our own way of accomplishing things that we want done because we're it's perspective.
Yeah.
We're lacking the perspective to realize kind of the compromise. And there's some people that are really good at this sort of a thing of about noticing how it can be a win-win-win situation.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Finding the compromise. Compromise doesn't mean, I don't know. This gets complex for me. But it's I've heard a thing and I do to some degree believe it. It's compromise doesn't mean I give up some of what I want, you give up some of what you want, and we both end up on something that we're both dissatisfied with. Finding that option that gives us both what we are wanting out of this thing. And that does happen where we're wanting something very specific and we think we need to get it in a certain way.
Yeah.
So we ask for something just in interpersonal relationships, we're asking for something that we think that we want, but we're asking for something very specific, a specific way to get there. But the person that we're asking that of can't do it in that way for whatever reason, because it's that would not be along with what they're wanting. But if we find a different method to get you what you want, then we can find a way that it works for me getting what I want. I've got my pronouns so mixed up there, but you get what I'm saying. You get so focused on the what and we miss the why. Why do we want this person to do this specific thing? Because we want this. What's a way that we can get to that second place that is good for both of us, that we both like? We get so focused on the specific thing, but not the result that we're looking for.
And there might be a different way to get to that same result that will be better.
Yeah. And I know I get caught up in the specifics like that sometimes. And it's because of that I have started to recognize in some people that I know that are really good at doing it the smart way by finding that different solution that makes everybody happy.
When looking at this, I don't want to name specific political things, but there are several political things that I can think of where the reason why I want a thing to happen why I want like my government to take care of a problem a certain way. My reason behind why I want it might be different than a reason that somebody else wants. For instance, if I do get into the weeds on it. When it comes to, I know that people are like, I don't like money going to other countries because I want our money from our country to stay in our country or to benefit our country. I only want it to benefit our country. And it's like, okay, my reason why I think that we should help like other people in other countries is because they're human beings and they deserve help if we can provide help. That's my reason why.
Mm-hmm.
But I can understand how another person's like, but I think that my country is more important than everybody else's country. I'm like, okay, I understand that like that's what you're thinking. But also, when we spend money to help other countries, it makes them our allies. It makes it so that they're not making allyships with other countries that hate America. And so that stability that it brings to our country when we help other people is a benefit. So it's like, do they want to help do they want to build that bridge for the aesthetics? No, they want to build it to increase trade. Okay, cool. Then fine. Let's do that because by providing that foreign aid, you both are helping America by creating like stable alliances. And I also get to feel like those people are being helped by my taxes.
Yeah. Good example.
Yeah.
Great example.
Not that all foreign aid like programs are like all good and that there aren't problems. I would never suggest that there aren't problematic areas or whatever. But it's like one of those things where it's like there are many political things where somebody is like, I don't want this to happen for that reason. I mean, they might even say like, I want to get homeless people off the street. They ruin the aesthetics of the town. And I'm like, great, then let's find solutions to help homeless people. And they're like, no, I don't want to help them I want them to be helped so that I don't see them. Cool. Then let's help them. Whether it's because you aesthetically don't want to look at them anymore or because you think that they're human beings that like deserve to be homed and sheltered. It doesn't matter as long as get it taken care of. I don't care what your reasoning behind doing it is. We got to build this bridge.
Yeah. That's it. That's an even better example only because like the thing that they want, because like in the first example with like the trade, like they're saying, I don't want my money going to another country. And really just say like your argument, which I mean, I agree with is like, it can be it can have a beneficial, like be beneficial in another way that you're not, that you might be something that you care about, but not in this specific instance. But in that specific instance, it's like what they want is those people to not be there in wherever they happen to be anymore. Yeah. So like having them not be there is what they want. And that's also what you want. You don't want them. I don't know why. I'm assuming that's the side that you are in this instance.
Yeah. But I'm like, I also don't
want them to be in the middle of the road because I want them to be living in a house and like
I want them somewhere that's like
living
safe,
somewhere
sanitary,
that's safe and like sheltered. Yeah. Yeah. So it's like in that example, really the thing that both people want is the same. And it really is just the reason. That's the difference. So it's like that's the perfect time of agree to disagree. Agree to disagree so that we can agree on what we should do.
Like this bridge does need to be built. It's okay if the reason why you're putting money into building it is because you like the look of it, because you can look at it while I'm strolling across to do business. It does not matter. Yeah. None of us are going to be, all of us can get what we want, even if what we want are different things. And so, I really like that. That it's really a story of like, it's a way to say, look at these idiots, but do you see how much they're like us?
Yeah.
And how we act around each other. So who's really a town of fools? Because like we are capable of doing the same foolish things that these people are capable of.
Amazing. Yeah. It's again that we are them and they are us of it all. Like, which makes it even more important than what we were talking about before, where it's like they have to be more us than them for these stories to work, in the way that they do.
Yeah. Because, it's not, the mean bite is like missing out of it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, hopefully that language like made sense. That it's like, instead of it being these stories are mean for the sake of being mean to like a group of people that I hate, we're teasing this group of people who are essentially like an imaginary group of people that are us. But we feel comfortable believing that like, oh, all the really dumb ones don't live in my neighborhood, when it's like, listen, they are sprinkled throughout.
Even more than that, though, I feel like it is a situation that allows that self-reflection. Like it's the way that it's why that these stories can be then taken and used to teach important lessons. Like, because if someone, you're considering them like so different, you know what I mean? That you're like looking down on them and like reviling them and saying that basically, you know, like treating them as if they're not even human or whatever, you know what I mean? Or the further you get down that road, the less likely you are to be like, oh, like these are the ways that I behave that way. So it's like the more us that they are, the easier it is for us to see how they are like us and see how we are being like them in the way that we're like criticizing them for. Yeah. But it's like, if you don't consider yourself to be the same, then you're not going to be able to have that kind of same degree of self-reflection, which is like, man, it's so great.
Yeah.
I love it.
So yeah, I thought it was about time that we talked about towns of fools and wise men of Gotham and the city of Chelm. What I think is so beautiful about visiting like these towns of fools is the fact that people have been like creating stories like this. They've been talking about this for literal centuries, millennia even, from Abderites, philosophical school attendees to Florida Man. We've always, as human beings, enjoyed these types of jokes around people who are very much like us, but not like us.
Thank you for listening to The Fairy Tellers. If you enjoy what we're doing, please leave us a review or share us with your friends. For access to exclusive bonus content, consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/thefairytellers. Special thanks to Andy Forey for our music and to Clarice Inch for our artwork. And of course, a big thank you to all our patrons. Without all of you, this show wouldn't be possible.
Good stories pay little attention to cultural or linguistic frontiers. The student of story collections find themselves adrift on an ocean of stories, an ocean which is boundless, deep, and ceaseless in motion. Robert Irwin.
And the city of Chelm.
Oh my gosh.
I'm going to re-say it so I don't sound like a freak.
That was some like Nacho Libre vibes.
It really was.
Their nucleus.
And when you find the center of a man, you get down to his nucleus. Now I have to like stop laughing so I can like say it in a way that I can like cut it. Don't look at me.